What's going on YouTube? Clover Bells here, back with another Series 12 VGC Fundamentals video, and today we're going to be talking about speed tiers and how they can influence your EV spread. So in our last video, we talked about how to calculate stat bonuses and stat drops. You know, how do you get +1? How do you get -1? How do you calculate that? And then how does that affect your EV spreads? So that also ties in what we're going to look at in today's video, because again, an important part of VGC and understanding the game is understanding speed tiers of the current meta at the given time. So if you didn't watch that video, make sure you watch it. Otherwise, some of what I say in this one will not make too much sense, because you have to be able to calculate things that, you know, at +1 or +2. This way you can outspeed those threats or the current meta mons that you want to outspeed. All right, so the way we like to characterize them in terms of speed tiers is, what I first like to look at is what we call the base speed 100 mons, right? So I'm just waiting for this to load. Okay, so here we go. We got our base speed 100 mons, and what that means is basically Pokemon that have a base speed stat of 100. Now, what that also means is they have the same final stat, assuming that you fully EV them with a full 252 investment with the speed nature involved. So who are our base speed 100 mons that are relevant in the meta right now? So of course we're going to start off with Zard, aka Charizard. This is, you know, the premier Dynamax option in that Sun team that's, you know, dominating the format right now in Series 12. Then you also have something like Zapdos, you know, also really good, more seen on those Kyogre teams, but also seen outside of Kyogre teams. Then you have Entei, you know, really good with something like Solgaleo, just, you know, for Bulldoze procking. Then you have Regieleki, you know, often paired with Weezing and Calyrex, Shadow Rider, and Zacian. And then you have Palkia over here, and many people don't understand that Palkia also is a base 100, even though typically right now it's being run in a more slower kind of format, but nonetheless it is still a base speed 100. Now, in terms of the final stat, because they all have the same base speed, they're all going to have the same final stat if you EV them for it. So if you look at Charizard here, if I go for the timid nature here, and if I fully invest this bar, you will see that the final stat is 167. So this is the stat that you have to remember if you want to understand what is the base speed stat for a base speed 100 mon. 167, and that means all of them are going to be 167. So if I do Zapdos for timid as well, 167. Entei, I probably won't do timid, but it's probably Jolly, which is the same idea, 167. Gigas, again, same thing, Jolly. You know, I don't have to go through all of them. I'm probably not going to do Palkia. It's the same thing, right? So 167. So the idea is, you know, if you are running these Pokemon, if you have an Airstream boost, you have to multiply your final speed stat by 1.5. We talked about that in the last video. And if you slow them down, they are -1, which means you divide their final stat by 1.5. Okay, now if you're running slower Pokemon and you want to generally try and outspeed these mons with an Airstream, or reduce their speed by -1 with something like Icy Wind, Electro Web, Bulldoze, anything, you know, to change their speed stat, right? But this is one of those benchmarks, 167. So you got to keep that number in mind, because when you're doing your team building and you're trying to do your EV spreads, if you understand your speed tier first, that is the first step in trying to create your full-fledged EV spread, right? Yes, there's other things that take into account, like what item do you have? You know, can you optimize with that? You know, is there something else on the team that's going to affect your spread? Like certain damage calcs, that's all done later. But the first thing that you do when you make your EV spreads is always look at the speed tier that you're trying to, you know, manage, and, you know, look at the threats, and that's what you want to outspeed. So we've got the base speed 100s. Okay, and now let's look at other stuff. Let's look at the base 95s and the base 90s. Because this is other things that are a little bit slower, but, you know, they can be faster if you have the right support. So if it's something like Solgaleo here, actually, you know what? Even before I look at the mid-tier speed mons, I'm going to look at Regieleki here. So let's actually start from the top. So let's start with the #1 fastest mon. So Regieleki, okay. Again, if you fully invest it, this final stat is 277, right? So what that means is, you know, when you're doing your team building, you want to try and outspeed Regieleki. And the minimum number that you need, assuming it's max speed timid like this, is 278. Now the question is, how do I get to 278? Because I naturally can't do it with anything else because Regieleki is the fastest thing. So I'm gonna need some help to get that 278 mark, and there's a few ways to do it. But one thing you can do is either give yourself an airstream boost or give Regieleki a -1 reduction with something like an electro web, an icy wind, a bulldoze, you know, something. Okay, so how do we calculate that? Well, if you do, if you take out your calculator and if you were to manually do this, 277 divided by 1.5, right? Assuming you slow this Eleki down, that's going to get you to 184.66667, right? AKA 184. This is why when you have a Zacian, okay, and if you want to outspeed Regieleki, this is why some of them are EV'd to go to 185, right? Because this, with an airstream boost or an electro web reduction on the opposing Regieleki, will outspeed their Regieleki, okay? Because again, 185 times 1.5 gets you 277, right? Okay, now if I go back to Eleki, right here, oh wait, no, that's a speed tie. I meant 186. Okay, there we go. Now we'll fix it. There we go. 186. Okay, now we outspeed Regieleki because what is 186 times 1.5? Okay, that's 279. So now we generally outspeed Regieleki. So this is what I mean. So if you have something like, you know, something with that's flying, maybe I don't know, Thundurus on the team, and it goes for an airstream boost, then now your Zacian that comes in, you know, is faster than the opposing Regieleki because you got that +1 speed boost. Okay, so that's one idea. So this is how, you know, you're changing your EV spreads based on what you have on the team. Okay, but again, Regieleki is always the premier threat. You know, you always want to have something that can outspeed it if you don't have trick room, or at least have a way to outspeed it, right? Well, what about like Tailwind, right? What if, can I outspeed Regieleki under Tailwind? Yeah, of course. So if you do 277 divided by 2, that rounds to 138.5, which is 138. So you need something that's 139. And generally, what that means is if you have a Kyogre on your team, which generally has a Tornadus, okay, and you go something like Modest, you go for that 139 benchmark, okay, because now with Tornadus Tailwind on your team, now you outspeed Regieleki. Now you can go for the Water Spout before Regieleki zaps you with that max lightning attack. Okay, so once again, that's another example of something that I have on the team to give me that boost, which again affects my EV spread. So something like that. Now what's next on the list? So we talked about +1, we talked about the number that you need 186, we talked about 139, that's the number you need under Tailwind to outspeed Regieleki. So now what about Calyrex Shadow Rider? So with Shadow Rider, another kind of speed tier mon that you need to consider when you're trying to do your team building, and you need to try and beat 222. Okay, well, how do I beat 222? Well, either you have Tailwind on the team or you outspeed it by giving it a -1, or you yourself going for a +1 with the airstream boost or something. All right, so what is 222 divided by 1.5? All right, that's 148. So you need something with 149 to outspeed Calyrex Shadow Rider. This is why, you know, you have some of these faster mid-tier speed mons that generally try and go for that number to outspeed the Shadow Rider. So if you have something like Solgaleo, right? If you have Adamant Solgaleo, or, you know, if you don't have the speed nature on it, if you max the speed, look at that. It's very generous how it all works out, right? If you have a max speed Adamant Solgaleo, you know, now you're at 149. So if you have something to give you +1 airstream, or if you have Electro Web of your own, you can outspeed the Calyrex Shadow Rider, and then it can't give you an Astro Barrage and one-shot your Solgaleo. So that's another example of trying to outspeed something that's a threat in the meta. What about Tailwind? Well, if you do 222 divided by 2, right, because this is Tailwind, that comes out to 111, which means you need 112. And 112 is a very good number in VGC because 112 at +1, if you do the math, 112 times 1.5 with a +1 is 168. And why is 168 good? Because if you go back to our base speed 100s, 167 is their stat. So if you have something that's 112 and it goes for a +1 airstream, or something next to it goes through a +1 airstream, now it's at 168. So now you outspeed these guys, and then if it goes for a second airstream boost, or if it's subjected to tailwind, but I would say, then now you outspeed the Calyrex Shadow Rider. So I always say that 112 benchmark is like maybe the most important VGC number at the moment right now, just because of how much benefit it gets after +1 and then +2. Okay. The other thing you want to look at is something like an opposing Zacian. All right. So how do you outspeed Zacian? Well, you have to consider, is it a Jolly Zacian or is it an Adamant Zacian? Well, if you're Adamant max speed, okay, what stat do you hit? You hit 200s, right? So 200 divided by 1.5, if you take out your calculator, if you need to do this math, that gives you 133. So you need 134 at +1 to outspeed Adamant Zacian, okay? And some Pokemon aim for that speed stat. We'll show you who does that, okay? Something like this. All right, so again, if I go back to Solgaleo, you know, I may go for that 134 speed stat, okay? You know, and then at +1, I outspeed max speed Adamant Zacian. Very valuable speed tier to go for, and then that'll influence the rest of my EV spreads, because if I run it a little bit slower, now I have more EVs to play with for my bulk and my attacking stat. So it's all about like, what do you want to outspeed, right? That'll affect the rest of your spreads. Okay, so now from here, what about like Jolly Zacian, right? So if I go Jolly, it's 220. So it's about two under Calyrex Shadow Rider, because Calyrex Shadow is 222. Well, if you have 220, okay, then again, if you have to do this math, 220 divided by 1.5, again, that's 146.6667, which is 147. But generally, you know, I always like to say, look, if you're gonna outspeed this thing, right, why not just go 2 more to outspeed the Shadow Rider as well? So instead of going for that 147, just go for 149, right? And generally, this is also why some of these mons over here, like Kyurem, you know, this is the unfortunate circumstance where, you know, Kyurem is what we call a base speed 95, and if you don't run the speed stat, I mean the speed nature for a base speed 95, you unfortunately, even at +1, you speed tie a Jolly Zacian, and that's bad for Kyurem, right? Because then, you know, it comes down to, do I take the Behemoth Blade, or do I go first and KO it with something like Life Orb Earth Power? So unfortunately, because of this reason, you almost have to go Timid, just because you can outspeed the Zacian now, right? Because you have a lot more speed EVs to play with, and now you can even outspeed the Shadow Rider at +1 if you want to. Okay, so again, that's how we're doing this. So you consider the Adamant Zacian, you consider Jolly Zacian, okay, and then if you go down even further, now you have something like Thundurus, which is something like some of the other mid-speed mons want to try and outspeed. So if you have Thundurus here, let's say it's Defiant, you know, there's a lot of Pokemon that want to outspeed Thundurus. What's this stat here? So if you go here, then you go to Jolly, 179, right? So, you know, you want to try and beat that with 180, you know, per se, or, you know, you want to try and outspeed this by +1 or getting this to -1. So if I do 179 divided by 1.5, that comes out to 119.33333, which means you need 120 with a +1 to outspeed it. And generally, that's what you do here with some of these guys with the base speed 90s. So something like Groudon, if you go on Picolytics, you'll see that some Groudons, they invest up to this much, 120, 76 investment, because at +1 you outspeed an opposing Thundurus. Some of them might go to 121 to outspeed those speed creepers. But generally, you know, even something like Ho really wants to outspeed that thing. So, you know, even something like this is pretty good. Just to, you know, you don't want to take a Max Lightning, right, from a Thunder. So you want to get that Airstream off first, and then, you know, even if they bring in their Thundurus next turn, you at least outspeed it because you went for an Airstream the previous turn. Okay, so that's again another example. And then from here, I can just invest this into my bulk and then into my attacking stat, and then take into account damage calculators. But again, that's all for another video for another time. I'll show you how to make a complete EV spread, putting all the concepts together. But right now I'm just presenting each thing to consider for your EV spread separately in different videos, so that way it's a little bit easier to understand and not so overwhelming, right? So where were we? All right, so yeah, for Thundurus, yeah, you know, again, that 120 mark is good for Thundurus to try and outspeed it. Okay, we did Zacian, we did Calyrex, we did Regieleki. We talked about the 2 numbers for each of those. We did the base speed 100s. So now back to these guys. So something like, again, Ogre, generally with Tornadus, wants to go with Tailwind. 139 is a good number to outspeed Regieleki, but if there's no Tornadus, then you just make it slower, and then you just go for more bulk, and you go for hitting harder. You might even go with like a Choice Scarf here, okay, which can also affect your EV spread. And then from here, you would probably just go like Timid. Where's Timid? All right, and then have something like this, and now you outspeed the Shadow Rider with the Choice Scarf, even though there's no Tornadus on your team. So, you know, it all depends. Like, you see how the item can affect your EV spreads? So that's another thing to consider. But it's all about, like, what do I want to outspeed? You have to have it in your mind, the target that you want to outspeed, and then that's where you go from there. Or you can just make this extremely slow and just go for, like, modest. Like, if the Kyogre is in Trick Room, you can just do this up to 112, and then that's it. Because then, you know, if you have a flying type on the team, okay, sure, then I can outspeed something like a Thundurus, which is a big threat to Kyogre. I generally want to outspeed that. Or you can go, you know, up to 120. I'm sorry, I said 112. I mean, 112 to outspeed the base 100s, like a Zapdos, okay, or like a Charizard going for Solar Beam or, you know, Max Overgrowth. But 120 will help me outspeed that Thundurus. And again, you know, that 139 mark is for Tornadus with Tailwind. So you see how I have different speed tiers for a different target to outspeed. That's how you have to think about it when you're doing your team building, okay? You know, and Groudon, more or less the same idea. You know, you can run it generally slow, like 112 is pretty good, like especially if you're on a Trick Room mode, put the Groudon here. Or you can run it a little bit faster and just go for that 121 mark or 120 mark for that Thundurus outspeeding. You know, very rare do Groudons try to go very, very fast because they appreciate the bulk a little bit more. And then Landorus, so the thing with Landorus, you know, you always want to have like a jolly speed because you want to outspeed these guys. So the thing with Landorus is the base speed is 91, whereas all these guys are base 90. So like Landorus, you know, if it's max speed, just outspeeds any of these guys no matter what. Okay, and things like Reshiram, you know, you want to try and outspeed a Landorus at +1 as well. You know, so this way you want to go for that 158 mark if you're something like a Reshiram. Same with like Dialga. Dialga's like Kyogre or Groudon, you know. 112 is a good number, okay, because, you know, you're in Trick Room, or you can even go like 113 just to outspeed those Dialgas that are also going for 113 or 112, I should say. And then from here, you know, you can just, you know, after 2 Airstreams, you outspeed the Shadow Rider. But again, you see the value of that 112 mark for the speed tier. All right, and then, you know, how does this affect some of the base speed 95s that are threatening? So something like Solgaleo, right? You know, generally the Solgaleo wants to outspeed Landorus, right? You don't want to take a max Quake from a Landorus that's max Jolly. So what you do is you run Jolly yourself, and you want to try and outspeed 157, which is 158, and there it is. And now you have more EVs to play with. To invest either in your bulk or your attacking stat. So that's something else to consider. Lunala, again, same idea with these base 95. Lunala 97, so pretty easy to get to that 120 mark for Thundurus. You might even go a little more beyond that just to, you know, outspeed those other Lunalas that are trying to outspeed the Thundurus. But again, more or less the same idea. And then Yveltal, you know, this. Same thing with the Landorus, you know, you don't want to get hit with like those rock slides or whatnot. It's just not great. Same idea, or at least outspeed timid Kyogres, you know, because they're also very threatening. So that'll also affect your Yveltal EV spread. So if we just go back into the timid Ogre, you know, something like this, like, what is this number? 156. So you want that 157 mark, but then you might as well like go for that 158 just to like not get hit by Thundurus. So you see, you only go for 151. You don't even outspeed the ogre. So if I go timid, all right, there it is. And then now I outspeed the Thundurus and even that timid Kyogre. And then now I have more EVs to play with for the rest of my bulk and my attacking stat. Xerneas, same idea. I mean, Zern's doing pretty well right now in the meta at the moment. It's rising slowly, but still being limited because of Zacian. But you know, ideally, you know, if you want to outspeed Regieleki after Geomancy, if I put this here, you know, again, that 139 mark is pretty good. Or if you want to go for that Shadow Rider thing, you know, 149 is also pretty good as well. You know, pretty standard. And then something that's not so used as much as Zygarde, I mean, more or less the same kind of principles. I would probably try to aim to outspeed Zacians with the Zygarde. So with something like this, if you want with an Airstream boost, so let's say you're Jolly or even Adamant, you know, something like this with actually just go Adamant if you're gonna do it like that. You know, this is more than enough with the Airstream boost. That's fine. Or you can just outspeed the Shadow Rider and then just go up to here, you know, in the Jolly spread. But you know, Zygarde values that attacking stat because, you know, it's not that strong, so you definitely want to go Adamant and then just go for bulk and out bulk things. But more on how to EV all of this stuff fully later in another video. But what I'm doing is just showing you things to consider outspeeding these guys. Like, these are the threats, like the Thundurus, Zacian, Calyrex, Shadow Rider, and the Regieleki. These are the big hitters. These are the big threats. And these guys, they want to outspeed this. All right, the base speed 100s, the 95s, the 90s, they want to outspeed these guys, okay? Because, you know, they're slower. And because they're slower, they need ways to get faster. And the only way to do that is, again, those Airstreams, those Electro Webs, those Icy Winds, those Bulldozes, whatever you have in terms of speed control, Scary Face, Thunder Wave, but you name it, something to help them outspeed meta threats, all right? I'm not going to be really talking about Trick Room because that's like another kind of thing. And there's nothing really that's in the same kind of speed tier with each other in Trick Room. I guess you could say like the Torkoal and the Amoonguss and the Glacier, but then that's not even relevant at the moment. But yeah, so yeah, we do all of this stuff in the coaching that we do privately one-on-one with the team building. All right, so if you're interested in learning more about how to do EV spreads for your squads and how to optimize them, again, that's a tier 3 sub to the channel. There's the join button with every video. It's also in the link description. So if you're interested in getting those squads ready for the tournaments, the regionals that are still coming, you know, definitely look into that. And I'll go even more in depth in explaining how to EV certain things. But hopefully the speed tiers make a little more sense after this video, and how to calculate them and how to outspeed certain threats. I didn't cover like super everything, but at least this is the general guideline here. The base speed 100s, the mid tiers that are 90s or 95s, and then the 4 demons, right? Regieleki, Shadow Rider, Zacian, and Thundurus. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed it, but we'll be back in the next video with another series 12 content video. Until next time, guys, have a good one.